Before we go any further, I want to make sure that we acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands and waters of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish people, past and present. The Duwamish people are the original stewards on the lands and water, past and present. This acknowledgement also, it is important to say, that does not become meaningful unless it's combined with accountable relationships and informed actions, and acts only as the first step for honoring the land that we are on and their people. Thanks for having us, and now I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Rebecca Beer.
Thank you so much, Paulina. My name is Rebecca Bear. I am the CEO of the Seattle Parks Foundation, and our mission is really to bring community leaders, civic leaders, and all our public partners together to create a thriving and accessible, connected system of public space for our community, for the health and happiness for each and every one of our citizens. We are here tonight because we are concerned about the critical infrastructure of our green spaces in our city and how they impact and affect communities of color and our overall environment. The pandemic has shown to us that parks and green space are critical infrastructure, and the next leader of our city needs to ensure that that infrastructure is well funded, well supported, and driven by community voices. Tonight, we have some questions for the candidates about some of the most pressing issues on social environmental issues on environmental and climate justice. These questions have come from a collection of community organizations throughout the city, some listed here and many more, who have submitted questions ahead of time for the candidates to answer. We weren't able to put all of those questions in, and so there will be opportunities after for additional questions. There's also going to be opportunity for questions from the audience that we hope the campaigns will have an opportunity to answer after this forum. We're really excited tonight to have as our moderator, and you can go to the next slide, Marcus Green. Marcus is one of the premier environmental justice reporters in the area. He is the current publisher of the South Seattle Emerald and the founder. He's a columnist for the Seattle Times. Growing up in Seattle, he experienced firsthand the impact of one-dimensional stories on marginalized communities, which taught him the value of authentic narratives. After an unfulfilling stint in the investment world during his 20s, Marcus returned to his community with a newfound purpose of telling stories with nuance, complexity, and multidimensionality, with the hope of advancing social change. This led him to become a writer and found the South Seattle Emerald, and he was awarded the Seattle Human Rights Commission's Individual Human Rights Leader Award in 2020. I'm thrilled to have Marcus here tonight. I'm looking forward to the conversation and the forum with each of our candidates. And Marcus, I'll hand it over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I just want to do a quick shout out to the Seattle Parks Foundation and the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition for hosting tonight's event. For our viewing audience, please note that the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, you can click on it to submit questions. You can also upvote other people's questions that you like by clicking the thumbs up icon next to them. While we are mainly answering questions submitted in advance today by our community-based partner organizations, we are also reserving time for a couple of questions from the public that is tuning in tonight. I do also want to quickly acknowledge that tonight's questions were selected with the express purpose of amplifying the voices of communities that aren't always amplified and putting to the head of the table communities that don't always have a seat at the table. Another quick note that on how things will work tonight with our candidate Q&A. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer each question directed at them. There may also be a couple follow-ups as needed. Each question is again directed at each individual candidate, and the only question that both of them will answer will be the opening question and the closing question. I do want to thank both of the candidates being here tonight, and Bruce Harrell and Lorena González. I want to say, I think this is the third or fourth event that I've moderated featuring the both of you. And I got to say that I see you all more than the person I'm dating, and she is starting to ask me questions. So I might need to scale back my moderating duties, but nonetheless, it is great to see both of you here tonight. Thank you both for being here. How are you both doing?
Very good. Thank you, Marcus.
Thanks for being with us once again, Marcus. It's good to be in relationship with you.
There you go. Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Well, we will, without further ado, I will open up the first question, and I will I'll ask it of Bruce first, going by alphabetical order here, and then we'll switch off. Bruce, the opening question to you, sir. How do you define environmental and climate justice? What is your vision and direction, and what policies and actions will demonstrate that vision and direction should you be mayor?
Yeah, thanks for that lob for the first question. I will define environmental justice as like any other form of justice, to treat equals equally and unequals unequally in proportion to their inequality. And by that, I mean that everything has to be from a form of equity. That when we look at the Duwamish as an example, that we know that the life expectancy is 8 years shorter than other parts of our city. When we look at this area as being 60% people of color and 70% of low income, we know that the water quality and air quality is lesser there. So equity is making sure that we do everything humanly possible to improve those conditions and make sure that they have the people who live in that region have a great quality of life, and as good, if not better, than other parts of the city. And so our policies will reflect that. Both our climate change policies, we've released on our website a very in-depth platform on environmental justice and climate change. But in addition to that, the other parts of one's life, whether it's their educational opportunities, their job opportunities through our Seattle Job Center. For me, it's not about one dimension of their life. Health becomes fundamentally critical towards one's success. Just to be able to breathe and have a healthy place to go to, a green space at park. And that's why we're so adamant on making sure everyone has clean and safe parks to play in. So at the heart of it, it's making sure that everyone enjoys the same quality of life and the opportunity for success in our city. And that's what our platform is all about.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, same question to you. How do you define environmental and climate justice? And what is your vision and direction? And what policies and actions will demonstrate that vision and direction should you become mayor?
Well, thanks, Marcus, for an opportunity to answer this question. And thanks to the organizers, the Parks Foundation and DRCC, for bringing us together to have this really critically important conversation. You know, for me, the issue of environmental justice is very personal. I grew up as a migrant farm worker out in central Washington state and have experienced for much of my life what it means to live in an area without clean water and without good air quality. And by that, I mean that I grew up in the summers living in migrant farm labor camps, being exposed to things like pesticides and not having access to clean water or facilities or any of the other things that you would expect to be in place to protect workers who are doing the hard work in 100+ degree weather. And so this last summer, when we had the extraordinary heat wave across our state, and I heard stories of migrant farm workers and others in our own community dying from the extreme heat, I think about what that means in terms of my definition of environmental justice. And at the end of the day, what it means is that the people who are dying from extreme heat, from lack of clean water, from the lack of clean air, are people of color. And so for me, rooting all of my policies and my actions on how we build reparations for people of color in our city who have for far too long been left out of any policy or resiliency efforts in the city is going to be critically important. I'm really proud to be the environmental candidate in this race. I've been endorsed by 350 Seattle Action, Washington Conservation Voters, Sierra Club of Washington. And I think it's exactly because of the combination of my lived experience and my strong commitment to centering those populations who have been burdened and continue to be burdened by our lack of action to address climate change.
Thank you both for your answer. And as I said, I will switch off between who is asked the question first. So this one will go to you first, Lorena. The question is, with climate disruption happening, wildfires, flooding, and drought, what will you do to dramatically reduce Seattle's climate impact? How will you continue to push Seattle to be a leader in the nation on climate action and addressing carbon pollution? What's your boldest idea?
The boldest idea. Thank you so much. So listen, I think we have to all acknowledge, and we do acknowledge, that the number one contributor to carbon emissions in our city continues to be the car. So we have to make radical changes in our infrastructure that allow for cars to be an option and not a necessity in our city. So to do that, we need to radically reimagine what our city looks like and how it's going to continue to grow. And for me, that means building a 15-minute city, one in which you can get to anywhere you want in the city within a 15-minute walk or bike ride, and to create all of the infrastructure needed to have green, sustainable transit options, to make sure that walking is safe. This is how we make it easier for people to get out of their cars, get into a carbon friendly mode of transportation, and to really also build a vibrant community with all of the amenities that we want and deserve, including clean parks, schools, childcare, and places to work. So I think putting us on the trajectory of being a 15-minute city, similar to what the mayor of Paris is talking about, is the big transformation we need if we are serious about giving people the opportunity to get out of their cars and use carbon-free green modes of transportation.
Thank you. Bruce, the next question to you. The question is, the climate crisis is here, and climate change will only make bad things worse. In the face of cumulative impact, what will you do to secure a community-led, climate-resilient future?
Sure. I think it's very important to know, and the many environmental leaders who support my campaign would agree, that there's not one magic bullet, that it's a culmination of many policies. And I was very proud to help pass our first climate action plan, which became the theoretical basis for what eventually became our Seattle's Green New Deal, which again, we helped pass. And I say that in response to your question, that it's going to take a sense of urgency, that what you see, I think, at City Hall right now is the policies are in place, whether it's developing a localized clean energy economy, or establishing truly 100% clean buildings, making sure that we are establish world-class parks in our system and grow and develop tree canopy. We will, by the way, revisit the tree canopy ordinance to make sure we have added protections. But it's going to be a culmination of all these policies, and make sure that, of course, community voices are heard at the table. They are impacted the most. And this is a unifying element, that part of this work that we do, make sure that people are thinking outside of themselves, because it's not only what they feel and what they sense right now with 100-degree weather, they're thinking about their children and their grandchildren for generations to come. So we have a huge educational opportunity and unifying element. So we will use that narrative in all communities, rich, poor, affluent, everything in the middle, to realize that we are doing this work outside of ourselves. And that again goes back to why I believe in making sure our parks and our water is clean, and our parks are clean for everyone to use. The tree canopy is there. We will use this opportunity as a unifying element in our city.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, next question to you. The question is, in a city that is rapidly developing, maintaining and growing the urban tree canopy is the best way to support carbon impact and reduce the heat island effect. With more than 2/3 of the city's urban forest on private property, what can the city do to protect and expand the urban tree canopy?
Yeah, I think there's, tree canopy is certainly one way that we can make sure that we are addressing urban heat zones. And I'm definitely committed to continuing to address the realities of the disproportionality of our tree canopy. It's really important for the city, I think, to expand investments in our urban tree canopy, in our parks, right-of-ways, and publicly funded housing. There was a report in 2016 that talked about how downtown Seattle and the greater Duwamish Valley have the lowest levels of existing tree canopy. I know this personally because I used to live in the Duwamish Valley, proud former resident of South Park and White Center, and currently live in West Seattle. So I know how important it is to invest in our tree canopy, in our urban tree canopy, as one of the many strategies to reducing and mitigating against some of the carbon emissions, and making sure that that our tree canopy investments are being done equitably, again, to make sure that we are mitigating against the impacts of urban heat zones in those areas who experience the highest temperatures in our city is going to be how we drive that mitigation strategy.
Thank you. All right, Bruce, this question is to you. How would you prioritize the health and well-being of people who have historically been disproportionately impacted by who have been disproportionately impacted by legacy pollution? What specific actions would you take as the leader of a city with still 13 years of life difference expectancy among North and South neighborhoods?
Yeah, so we have to realize first, and that's a great question, Marcus, that it can't be done by the city alone, that our partners with the county, the port, the state, and the federal government, as demonstrated by some investments from these jurisdictions into the Duwamish Valley, that this becomes critically important. You'll see that many of these leaders have endorsed me throughout the port and throughout the county and throughout the state, because they realize that at the heart of this environmental justice movement, and it is a movement, that in 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you didn't hear much about environmental justice. And so they realized the huge disparities in neighborhoods. And so it's again, the mayor has to be sort of the loudest voice leading the way and making sure that they bring together all of those resources, a significant investment opportunity. So we'll not only make sure that we have the investment opportunities in front of us, we'll make sure that, again, the smart solutions that are part of the Green New Deal, again, all the way from our non-reliance on fossil fuels, and making sure that we use in Olympia, the new laws that were passed. We have the cap and trade law, the ban on plastics, the HEAL Act. These are groundbreaking laws that our state has given us tools that will generate hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have to pour that money back into the communities that need it most. And these are the discussions that I'm actively having now with many of the people who've endorsed my candidacy in the name of environmental justice. And that's how we'll get it done.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, this question is for you. The question is, the Duwamish River is the only river in Seattle currently going through a triple environmental threat, allowing for more cancer-causing chemicals, impacting people, impacting habitat, and fishing communities. How are you going to protect Seattle's only river and the communities living around them to ensure that they are upholding the commitment to a full, equitable, and health protective river cleanup that includes the Lower Duwamish Superfund site and the Duwamish River's East Waterway?
Really, really big question, an important question. I just want to start off by acknowledging the hard work of Paulina Lopez over at DRCC, and to all of the leaders before her who have worked tirelessly on getting us to the point where we felt that there was going to be some meaningful mitigation and work done on the Duwamish River, to preserve that river and to make it once again a healthy river, and that's important for a lot of reasons. Not first and foremost, not to mention the fact that we as the city played a huge role in making the river unhealthy, along with other agencies in the area. And quite frankly, the next mayor has the responsibility of making sure to hold SPU, the Seattle Public Utilities, accountable for the work that they committed to do through the Superfund actions that are currently now appear to be wavering. So I think it is critically important to continuing to build trust within communities who have been overburdened by pollution, to make sure that we, as the pollutants, are modeling the behavior we expect of other polluters. And in this instance, it means taking responsibility, not breaking our word, not backing down, and cleaning the river and making sure that it is healthy and meets the expectations of the advocates who have been fighting for years to make sure that we can restore the Duwamish.
Thank you. Bruce, I actually wanted to go ahead and ask you that same question about the Duwamish River. Do you need me to repeat that one for you?
Yeah, I was actually reading some notes for another question since you were changing up the question. So could you
doing it on the fly. Doing it on the fly.
Curveball there.
We had a request to get your response to this one as well. Sure. So the question is, the Duwamish River is the only river in Seattle currently going through a triple environmental threat, impacting people, habitat, and fishing communities. How are you going to protect Seattle's only river and the communities living around them to ensure the upholding the commitment to a full, equitable, and health protective river cleanup that includes the lower Duwamish Superfund site and the Duwamish River's East Waterway?
Sure. So, and I think many of the listeners know of my work in the council's work, and I'm certainly not going to take sole credit for the council's work in making sure we brought attention to the almost atrocities that has occurred for decades with the river, and making sure that in the Superfund work and the different remedies to remedial actions that were necessary to get us back on the right track, that we had many discussions making sure that we had the right record in order to justify the funding to fix it. So that's again where leadership comes in place. You'll see that Congressman Mayoral Strickland, as an example, who sort of endorsed our climate plan and our cleanup efforts, that this is where our relationships are going to come in of critical importance. So what we're going to have to do is, again, show the math, show the disparities that exist in this region. They are glaring. And working with, again, the county, the federal, the port, and the different jurisdictions that have funding available, including, I don't know if I said the state or not, make sure that our investment strategies match our commitment to justice and equity. The mayor has to be the leader in this work. And again, when you look at, again, the lifespan and even the water quality and the air quality of this particular region, it is time for equity to be achieved. So I'd be very happy to be one of the loudest evangelists of getting this work done. It's going to take relationship. It's going to take many trips to DC, many lobbying efforts that we will champion, and we'll get it done.
Thank you, Bruce. I will ask you the next question, but I'll also ask it of Lorena, so that it's only fair. So this question to you, Bruce, is: youth of color have been left behind when decisions are being made about the future of their neighborhoods. For example, youth from the South Park community are the highest per capita in the city. They have repeatedly asked for a youth center and a culturally appropriate community center. What will you do to support them in making this a reality, as currently there is no space for youth in our community? How would you make sure you bring their voices into policymaking?
So this is where we actually have tools to succeed. We have the Metropolitan Parks District, or the Seattle Parks District tool that has untapped bonding capacity as an example that was put on earth to make sure that we can work with young communities, particularly underrepresented groups like the one you described, to make sure that whether it's community centers or athletic fields, that their needs are met. This is you talked about on the first question, what justice is about, environmental justice. So what we will do under my leadership is we will re-examine the rate that we are currently using in terms of the Metropolitan Parks District rate. You may recall that it has been reduced from its original amount in 2016 from 0.33 per thousand to I think it's 221 now, a significant decrease. We will look at increasing that, of course, to meet the needs of that voice and have that voice at the table so they can tell us what they believe are in the best interests of their own community. It'll be community led, but we have to show the leadership to use these tools that are now legally available to us.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, I want to pose the same question to you. Did you need me to reread the question to you?
I don't. I was listening along. I'm happy to just answer it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So, I love this question. I mentioned in one of my previous responses, I'm a proud former resident of South Park. It still plays a really important role in my life, and appreciate the opportunity to go back there as often as I can, and was just out there a couple weeks ago. And I used to live right across the street from the only community center in the South Park area. And I'm really familiar with the need to have safer, better, well-lit places for our youth of color to recreate. So I think there's a few things we can do in this area and that I would commit to as the next mayor. One is I think there's an opportunity to look for some really strong public-private partnerships to create additional programming, support, and opportunities to actually build structures in South Park that will allow for us to house some of these youth programming. Second, Gote Soren's running Cultural South Park. She's a supporter of my campaign and a good friend. And I think that they are doing a tremendous amount of work to find and be creative about how to take back some of the underutilized, polluted land in South Park to repurpose it for building community, including housing and cultural spaces that can be accessible to our youth. South Park Plaza has been a huge endeavor for the community, but more needs to be done, and it needs to be easier for members of the community to come together to reclaim that public property to build these services around youth. And then the last thing around the existing community center, making sure that we expand their service hours and fund culturally competent and linguistically appropriate services and programs at that center, and really truly wrap around the center services related to childcare, I think is really critically important in order to allow people unfettered and real meaningful access to the programming that currently exists there and the future programming that I would be willing to support.
Thank you. Now, Lorena, this question I'll say with you. It says some majority BIPOC communities continue to be food deserts. How would you prioritize community-led work focused on increasing equitable access and opportunities to grow, to learn about, and/or eat healthy, affordable, and culturally relevant foods?
Such an important question. Again, I grew up in an extraordinary amount of poverty and had to rely on the system of food banks in my own community growing up. And so I certainly understand what it means to be food insecure in our community. And frankly, during COVID, I still have close family and friends who are very food insecure and rely on food banks in our area to be able to meet their needs. So I think it's really important part of building healthy communities to make sure that all of our communities, especially our low-income communities of color, have access to healthy grocery stores. And we can promote that by expanding our Fresh Bucks program, the SNAP program, and making sure that those continue to be available, widely available at our farmers market. And that brings me to the next point. I think it's really important for us to look at the equity of how our farmers markets are placed throughout the city and work together with the Seattle Farmers Market Association to figure out a solution on how to bring those healthy farmers markets to communities that are currently experiencing a food desert as it relates to really healthy foods. This is going to be critically important to making sure that we continue to build the health of our community members.
Thank you. Bruce, this question is to you. The question is, in Seattle, 75% of the pollutants in Puget Sound come from roads, highways, and other hard urban surfaces. Race is the most significant predictor of a person living near contaminated air, water, or soil. These issues are often being tackled by different departments within the city. What would you do to accelerate solutions to these chronic problems that have been 100 years in the making? What are your ideas for offering departments, who all have different mandates, the flexibility to collaborate if it means a better outcome for the public?
Yeah, so once again, similar to our tree canopy policies, where you have many departments concerning themselves with tree canopy, that under my administration, you'll see a very unified approach, making sure that we have hired the best climate scientists, the best climate activists, and we'll coordinate that in a much more unified structure. In dealing with the current administration, I've asked some questions about, and I've been briefed many times over the years about the different approach on whether it's SPU or some of the climate, the departments are working on their own climate plans. So we're going to centralize that to the best we could to make sure that, again, we are implementing best practices. Again, it's one of the pillars of the Green New Deal was to have that sort of closely coordinated approach, and it is so well needed. So you'll see many departmental change. I've talked about a few organizational changes, and one of them will be in our climate change work. It will go with, again, with when I said it in another form, I said, when you think of who the climate leader in the city is, or who they are, who comes to mind? And, you know, no one readily comes to mind. And again, you'll see many of these leaders have endorsed my climate change plan. Many names will come to mind because we will centralize it and we will lead using the tenets of the Green New Deal that we passed as its fundamental foundational document, sort of our template, if you will.
Thank you, Bruce. Lorena, this question goes to you. The question is, the Parks Department General Fund has been defunded for the last several years, and funds from the Park District have been used to supplant the general fund. This is contrary to the voter-approved levy. What is your commitment as a mayor to reestablishing parks funding at a sustainable level and recovering the losses of the last few years?
Well, good news on that front is we are currently in the budget process. I'm going to slip into that role just really quickly. We are restoring that funding. I do intend to support the restoration, particularly of those levy dollars to the parks funding. I think that's really critically important to rebuild the sustainability of those investments. You know, I am really conscientious of the fact that we need to continue to identify sustainable and additional new resources to allow for our Parks Department to meet the scale of the need of a growing city. So as we continue to grow, the demand for urban green spaces and areas to recreate is going to continue to expand. And so we need to make sure that as we are re-envisioning the next, the sort of future of our parks and our park network throughout the entire city, we need to also pair that with making sure that there are adequate resources available to the Parks Department to both maintain and to restore and to continue to activate our parks in a way that allows for healthy use of those parks by all of those who wish to use it. And so I have a vision of making sure that we can create those inviting spaces, and that we can and that we can have the vibrancy in our programs and in our services offered at parks, including functioning restrooms, and making sure that they continue to be that they continue to be family friendly and accessible for people of all abilities.
All right, thank you very much, Lorena. Bruce, this next question is for you. According to city data, we reached a tipping point in 2020 and no longer have the amount of park acres needed to address public needs and support public health and well-being for our growing population. How do you plan to fund parks with the expected growth of our city? Where do you see accessible parks and green space as a priority in your administration?
Thank you. And I guess I should give some context that, 25 years ago when we passed Initiative 42 to make sure that there were no net losses in parks. I mean, that was, as you may recall, when people were actually the executive were looking at some creative uses for, I think, golf courses at the time. So I've been consistent in decades fighting for our open space in our parks. And that's why I'm so passionate about what we see now in our parks, which are the unfortunate people who are unhoused, having to have de facto housing in our parks. What we will do is we will, again, using the tools of the Seattle Parks District, as I talked about earlier, we can bond against the revenues, and we can look at examining the rate and make sure that we address the backlog. And remember, I don't know the numbers now because I don't have access to them, at least I don't know them, but at one point there were like $280 million of backlog of capital projects. And so again, we have tools available to us, making sure we lead with equity, realizing that property taxes, that people should be exempt from them who cannot afford them, but also realizing that there may very well be an appetite to use both the tools and our bonding capacity to address the backlog and to acquire new parks. This goes to the quality of life that we need. We've had exponential growth, over 750,000 people here. And so when I talk about my zoning policies and my housing policies, I'm also quick to talk about that need for open space. You'll see on almost every part of our advertising, our commercials, our literature, whatever we talk about, you'll see me in parks. You'll see me in parks that I grew up here, right here in Seattle. You'll recognize them, and many of them have not changed. The housing around them is the same. This is a unifying element in our city, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but we had that park, that investment, that gem, coaching, mentoring. These are also public safety tools. When you look at the park I was just at, Judkins Park.
Unfortunately, Bruce, we're at 90 seconds. So.
Oh, I forgot. I was using shorter answers earlier. Don't I get to carry on some? Okay, sorry about that.
You can save it for the closing here.
All right.
Lorena, this next question is from you. It's our audience question. The asker says, do you favor expanding multifamily and mixed-use zoning across Seattle? If not, how will a vision of a less car-intensive, more walkable and transit-friendly Seattle be achieved?
I do support this. I think it's really important for us, and this is part of my vision around a 15-minute city. In order to achieve the goal of becoming a 15-minute city, it will mean making sure that our city is a welcoming city to all people of all incomes. And right now, that is not the case. Right now, nearly 80% of residential land, of residential neighborhoods, is strictly restricted to single family homes. In other words, we currently live in a city where in the vast majority of areas where people are allowed to live, it is illegal. It is illegal to live in an apartment or build an apartment. And so we need to re-legalize those multifamily housing options that are much more affordable, and then create pathways to ownership for those multifamily homes. Again, creating a smart policy around density will allow us to make sure that we are not a city that is exclusive and only available to the wealthiest in our city. That's the city I dream of. And I think it is possible to do this and to, again, make sure that we are leading with both making sure that the city continues to be inclusive in our housing justice policies, and also is an important strategy to meeting the challenges of climate change and achieving climate justice broadly across the city.
Thank you. Well, now we've come to our closing question, and it is an audience question. And as I lobbed the first question, our opening question, I should say, to Bruce, I'll lob the last one first to you, Lorena. The question comes from Nancy Bolin. Nancy asks, right now, many Seattle parks, excuse me, it says, her question, I'm trying to bring it up here, I'm sorry. Her question asks, right now, many Seattle parks are unhealthy for all citizens. The reason is that many homeless individuals are camped in parks with toxic waste, polluting park space with human waste, used drug needles, etc. What will you do immediately to solve this disturbing situation? Asked Nancy.
Happy to catch the love. Thanks, Marcus, and thanks, Nancy, for asking that really important question. So, obviously, the unmet needs of those who are unhoused are at the top of mind for many of us, and the reality is that we have seen a huge growth of people who are suffering from poverty and from a lack of access to meaningful behavioral health care, resorting to having to survive in our parks. So my goal as mayor is to ultimately end encampments and to make sure that people have the stable housing and the access to the services that they need to live healthy, sustainable lives. In the short term, I think it's important for the next mayor to commit to scaling up remediation programs around our parks, to make sure that we are picking up the needles, to make sure we are addressing the trash needs, and to make sure that we are working together with our public health experts in this area to make sure that we are addressing the hygiene needs, and that we are addressing, again, any sort of environmental degradation issues, and to do that rapidly while we actively and aggressively work on identifying transition solutions for each one of those individuals currently surviving in our parks.
Thank you very much for your answer. Bruce, same question to you.
Well, quite candidly, I think it's sort of disgraceful, the inaction we see at City Hall right now with respect to our parks, that this is a unifying element in our city. And the irony is the most underserved communities of color, often are those who need the parks the most. And it should not take a tragedy or a murder or a bad thing to happen for us to say that we need to invest in our parks. The city seems to be on cruise control. I talked about using the Parks District tools, our bonding capacity as a tools for investment. Even if we went back to the original amount, we would generate another $31 million. Again, leading with equity and making sure that those who can't afford to pay it, we will have relief for them. So what we're seeing is inaction. And under my leadership, you will see that this will be a unifying discussion. Even the ability to have small matching funds, which is great for small communities. I think that the city was able to tap into close to $5 million in matching funds. Right now, they can't even match the funds that are available. So using the Seattle District's tool that have been given to us and that is commonly used throughout this country, we will make sure that our parks are clean for everyone to use. And we will house people who are using this as de facto housing. That is inhumane to allow this. And anyone that knows the work I've done for decades and decades will know that I do not criminalize poverty. My heart goes out to them. My wife and I have spent a lot of time in this space. So I think it's time for a change of this kind of narrative, and I will lead the way and look forward to it.
Well, thank you for your answer, Bruce. Thank you, Lorena, as well. At this time, that does conclude the public portion of this forum, but we do want to thank all of our attendees. We do want to ask right now that our attendees who are not media to please go ahead and leave the forum. But before you do, I do want to remind you that there will be a Port Commissioners Forum on October 28th at 5 p.m. We're going to do the best that we possibly can to capture questions that didn't get asked today so that candidates can have some opportunity to answer them. And we will definitely do our best to make those answers public as well. Just a heads up to reporters, please do stick around for instructions on how to ask questions for tonight's media portion. I do want to welcome in Marla Wilson, who will be facilitating that portion of the night. And good night to everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcus.
Marcus.